In the fading light of a Mediterranean dusk, the harbors of Venice once echoed with the cries of merchants, the creak of timber ships heavy with spices, silks, and precious metals from distant empires. Galleys rocked gently against stone quays, their sails dyed in the vibrant hues of commerce, while the air carried the sharp tang of salt, cinnamon, and the sweat of thousands who built fortunes on the ebb and flow of global trade. For centuries, this floating city stood as the undisputed queen of Mediterranean exchange, a nexus where East met West in a dance of risk and unimaginable reward. Yet beneath the golden glow of its palaces and the ringing of its bells, forces were gathering that would unravel the very threads of its prosperity. No trumpets announced the coming storm. It arrived disguised as the ordinary rhythms of ambition and change, luring the proud republic into a complacency that history would remember as the prelude to ruin. The story of trade cities before economic ruin is as old as civilization itself, yet Venice embodies its most poignant chapter. Born from the marshes and refugee desperation after the fall of Rome, the city forged an empire not through conquest alone but through mastery of the sea lanes. By the height of the Middle Ages and into the Renaissance, Venetian merchants dominated the spice trade, channeling goods from the Levant, India, and beyond into the hungry markets of Europe. Their arsenals produced ships at breathtaking speed, their banks financed kings, and their diplomacy wove a delicate web across continents. Daily life pulsed with the energy of a true entrepot. Artisans crafted glass of legendary clarity in Murano, printers disseminated knowledge from the city's presses, and noble families hosted banquets where the world's luxuries adorned every table. Fishermen returned with the bounty of the lagoon, while porters hauled bales of pepper and cloves through narrow calles, their voices mingling in a dozen languages under the watchful gaze of the Doge's palace. But prosperity masked the invisible cracks. In the early decades of the 15th century, subtle shifts began to erode the foundations. The relentless expansion of the Ottoman Empire cast long shadows over the eastern trade routes, with each new conquest tightening the noose around Venetian outposts. Meanwhile, Portuguese navigators, driven by the dream of bypassing the middlemen, pushed down the African coast, seeking a direct path to the spices of the East. Few in Venice paid more than passing notice to these distant expeditions. After all, the Republic had survived plagues, wars, and rivalries before. The daily routines continued unchanged, the loading of ships at dawn, the haggling in the Rialto market, the whispered intrigues in the Senate. Yet these were the early warning signs, quiet as the lapping of waves against decaying pilings, signals that the old order of trade was beginning to fracture. As the 16th century dawned, tension mounted like storm clouds over the lagoon. The discovery of the New World and the Cape route by Vasco da Gama delivered a profound shock. Spices that once funneled exclusively through Venetian hands now flooded European markets at lower prices via Lisbon and Antwerp. Venetian galleys returned from the east with lighter cargoes, their captains reporting empty warehouses in Alexandria and Beirut. Internal pressures compounded the threat. Costly wars against the Ottomans drained the treasury, while the rise of Atlantic powers like Spain and the Netherlands introduced aggressive new competitors armed with superior ships and bolder ambitions. Still, the city's elite clung to tradition, investing in grander palaces and more elaborate ceremonies, as if spectacle could defy the shifting currents of commerce. The air in the piazzas grew thicker with unspoken anxiety, merchants exchanging glances over ledgers that no longer balanced as they once had. Key decisions, born of pride and miscalculation, accelerated the descent. Venetian leaders debated fiercely in the Great Council, some advocating bold naval reforms and alliances with emerging powers, others doubling down on monopolistic controls and protectionist tariffs that alienated partners. The Republic's hesitation to fully embrace the oceanic age proved fateful. While they fortified their Mediterranean strongholds, the world's trade axis tilted westward, away from the enclosed seas, toward vast open oceans. Heavy taxes and rigid guild systems, once the backbone of stability, now stifled innovation. Young merchants watched opportunities slip to foreign rivals, their ambitions curbed by a system that favored the old patrician families. The once fluid networks of credit and information began to stiffen, as confidence in Venetian reliability wavered under the weight of mounting debts and disrupted supply lines. The moment the system began to fail, arrived not with a single catastrophe, but through a cascade of quiet surrenders. By the late 16th and early 17th centuries, the flow of eastern riches slowed to a trickle. Ships lay idle in the harbors, their hulls barnacled and sails furled in defeat. The Rialto, once a cacophony of deals and fortunes made in an instant, fell into eerie silence broken only by the footsteps of the desperate. Factories shuttered, artisans sought work elsewhere, and the great banking houses, pillars of European finance, trembled under waves of defaults. No one understood what was coming next, the full unraveling of an economy built on centuries of dominance. The collapse did not begin with chaos, it began quietly, in the empty manifests, and the growing lines of unemployed dock workers staring out at a sea that no longer brought wealth. Human consequences unfolded with devastating intimacy across the city. Families that had known generations of comfort now faced hunger and eviction. Bread riots flickered in the poorer sestieri, while noble houses auctioned treasures to stave off bankruptcy. The vibrant social fabric tore along class lines. Servants turned to begging, skilled craftsmen emigrated to northern competitors, and the once proud merchant marine withered. Fear settled over the canals like fog, muting the laughter that once defined Venetian nights. Disease and poverty, longtime companions in crowded urban centers, returned with renewed vigor as malnutrition weakened the population. The daily rituals that had sustained the city's soul, markets, festivals, processions, became hollow reminders of a lost golden age, each empty stall and silent workshop a scar on the collective memory. Social breakdown deepened the rupture, transforming Venice from a beacon of cosmopolitan energy into a city haunted by its own decline. Corruption seeped into governance as officials grappled with shrinking revenues, while rival factions within the elite turned on one another in bitter power struggles. The spirit of enterprise that defined the Republic gave way to fatalism and nostalgia. Foreign observers noted the decay, once magnificent facades crumbling, harbors silting up from neglect, and a population increasingly preoccupied with survival rather than ambition. The invisible hand of economic forces had rewritten the rules, leaving those who once commanded them adrift in a new world order. By the time the signs became unmistakably clear, it was already too late for many to adapt, their lives tethered to a trade system that had vanished beneath the horizon. The long-term historical impact of such economic ruin in trade cities reverberated far beyond the lagoon. Venice's fall marked a pivotal shift in global power, accelerating the rise of Atlantic empires and the modern capitalist order centered on ocean-going commerce. Other Mediterranean hubs suffered parallel fates, their once thriving networks reduced to footnotes in the story of globalization. The Republic survived as a shadow of itself, its art and architecture enduring as testaments to what was lost, but its economic primacy never recovered. This pattern echoed across history, from the ancient entrepôts of the Bronze Age to the Hanseatic ports of northern Europe. Trade cities rose on favorable currents, only to founder when those currents changed, teaching harsh lessons about adaptability, over-reliance on singular advantages, and the fragility of interconnected prosperity. In the end, the story of trade cities before economic ruin serves as a haunting mirror to our own age of global supply chains and fragile dependencies. The waters of the lagoon still lap against the stones of Venice, but they carry echoes of vanished fleets and unfulfilled dreams. What remains is a city preserved in amber, a reminder that even the mightiest commercial empires are temporary constellations, vulnerable to the relentless march of technology, geopolitics, and unforeseen shifts. As we navigate our contemporary networks of exchange, the silent quays and faded grandeur whisper a timeless warning. Prosperity is never guaranteed, and the collapse, when it comes, often begins not in fire, but in the slow fading of winds that once filled every sail. The cycle endures, waiting for the next city, the next era, to learn or ignore its profound and unforgiving truths.